Hi, I'm Dr. Robin Koslowitz, YouTube's post-traumatic parenting expert. Today I want to talk about the ways in which trauma doesn't occur in the past, it occurs in the future. And I want to talk about a story that I recently read in the New York Times about Robin Davis, who has been a lifelong crusader and philanthropist against child abuse. And I really want to talk and unpack that article and talk about how trauma casts such a long shadow in our lives. And I want to unpack my AIM model, acceptance, integration, and meaning, and implications for that model in this story. But first, if you're a post-traumatic parent, if this topic interests you, if you've been thinking about the ways in which your damage is still damaging you and the ways in which you want to keep your damage from damaging your kids, click subscribe below so you never miss another episode. So this article is truly, this is a trigger warning. We're going to be talking about child abuse, and this article is truly a difficult read for someone like me who works with adult survivors and child survivors of child abuse and other forms of boundary crossing behavior, other forms of exploitation. It's hard to hear because it's always hard to hear because it shouldn't happen, and we all have to acknowledge that it's not okay that it happens. And at the same time, what can we learn from a story that's being publicly shared? So I want to point certain things from the story out. So Robin Davis, here's the way the article starts. He took his 68-year-old secret to court and finally confronted his ghost. This article is by Michael Wilson. Robin Davis spent a long career in finance and philanthropy, haunted by what had happened to him as a boy. Could an unusual trial on Long Island help him find peace? So what happened was New York State temporarily, for a very short period, in order to really acknowledge the harm that child abuse causes and the way that statute of limitation laws, which prohibit people from making a complaint when too many years since the incident have happened, the way those laws, while in some ways those laws are fair in the sense that people's memories change and things change, in other ways they really harm victims because sometimes it takes 20 years to have the courage to first tell anyone about the story because you have to heal to the point where you're able to. I've worked with quite a few post-traumatic parents who were very unaware of the ways in which specifically their child abuse had harmed them, and they kept saying things like, yeah, but it wasn't that big a deal, or yeah, it's okay, it's water under the bridge, I've dealt with it, I've handled it, I've processed it, I'm fine. And the first time they really felt that sense of anger that demands justice, that sense of like it wasn't okay and I'm not fine and actually this person needs to answer for what they did, very often that can happen when their own child reaches the age that they were when the abuse started. Because suddenly, I remember a friend of mine who was exploited by a relative when she was about 15. And for many years saying things like, it's fine, I handled it, I processed it, I bear some responsibility because I didn't say no, which we'll get to that. When her own daughter was 15 and she realized, oh my gosh, 15's a baby. 15-year-olds think they're so grown up and they know so much and they know nothing. Like they're really young. All of a sudden her anger started coming up, and of course the statute of limitations had passed and there wasn't a legal way of gaining redress. There were other ways, but there wasn't a legal way. So in an effort to combat that, the New York State suspended statute of limitation laws temporarily so that people who had experienced harm could be able to like face their abuser in court, get some legal hearing, even if like the abuser's dead already, and they're not going to get the kind of satisfaction, like they're not going to jail, they're not necessarily going to get the kind of satisfaction out of it that, it's not like that sense of like, now he's in jail. They're not going to get that, but being able to face your abuser in court and tell your truth and tell your story can be enormously helpful and enormously healing. So New York State did that, and Mr. Davis finally decided that he is going to go to court and he is going to sue the town where he grew up for their negligence, because when he was 10 years old, there was a coach who him. And he, describes the story with incredible detail, the kind of detail that a kid who's been abused usually uses, because it's seared into his brain. And, to like really describe it and explain it, to tell the story. Now, there's some things that are really striking about his story that I really want to unpack. For many years, he was known for his philanthropy, starting an organization to really give a voice to the voiceless and to support children. And he always said no particular reason. When people asked him, like, what motivates you? What gives you this drive? He always said, oh, no particular reason. It's just, this is a cause that doesn't have a poster child. This is a cause that doesn't have enough attention. I saw a void and I stepped into it, right? And he never said, oh, because it happened to me. Partially because the shame, and he had buried it so deeply, and partially because creating that foundation in some way was his voice. This was his way. In the story, he talks about he had this is what happens when we're trying to deal with a trauma that happened to us. And on the one hand, we're really trying to heal something in the world, but it's coming from a place of pain and a lack of healing, as opposed to a place of integration. In acceptance and commitment therapy, that might be termed as an away move rather than a towards move. So if he's starting his foundation and he's standing up for people that he views as being victimized from a place of, because my inner 10-year-old really needs revenge, and my inner 10-year-old needed someone to stand up for him and no one did. Where's your focus? Your focus is away from pain. If it's, I have learned from my experiences that what a child being traumatized needs is an advocate. So for that child, I am going to create a system and a program where they are getting supported, because I have a value around justice and supportiveness. That's a towards move. So the identical action can be an away move or a towards move, depending on what the motivation is. Because of course, his inner 10-year-old cannot be healed no matter how many real life 10-year-olds he helps. The inner 10-year-old is still dealing with the shame and the pain, and the inner 10-year-old needs some help. So he has a few stories where he was like the second in command at a massive hedge fund, and then he perceived the boss as being a bully towards someone, and he laid into that boss, and then he lost a $300,000 a year job, right? Why? Because he couldn't tolerate injustice, he couldn't tolerate bullies, he couldn't tolerate seeing someone take advantage of someone else, because that inner 10-year-old was focused on its own pain, as opposed to, what would be a really smart way to support this staff member that was being bullied? Can I perhaps talk to that person after the meeting, strategize with them, talk calmly to that boss and explain, champion that person, create a program and a system for a more equitable way of speaking in a meeting, right? There are many ways to tackle this problem, but if you're only focused on your own pain as opposed to on the needs of the person in front of you, you only get to help halfway. And he lost jobs, he had some failed marriages, again, because he could not handle any form of exploitation or advantage taking. And sometimes in a relationship, one person is going to take advantage a little bit, right? One person is going to be, have a hang up about something and be a little bit selfish in some way. And what we do is we fix it. We give them feedback and we say, when you do that, I feel this and it leads to this, right? When you order me around without taking my needs into account, I feel bullied. It makes me want to distance myself from you, or it makes me get really mad. And then when I'm really mad, it's hard to have a relationship with you, right? We fix it. But if it's that inner 10-year-old who is interacting, and a 10-year-old cannot be married to an adult, right? So that inner 10-year-old is lashing out, as opposed to adult me being informed by my inner 10-year-old, maybe this is exploitative, I need it, and then adult me says, okay, then I need to give feedback. And that's what the integration of psychotherapy helps us do. We integrate the wisdom and the pain of that 10-year-old without letting that 10-year-old run the show. So another thing I really want to point out in this story, which is really, I think, an interesting story. So he had this coach, and this coach was exploiting him. And one of the things the coach would do, typical with boundary crossing adults, is the coach would give him money to buy candy. And it sounds like his father was like tight-fisted. He didn't have a lot of money, so this money was really exciting. During the weeks of abuse, the coach gave the boy money to buy himself candy. And Mr. Davis said he ate so much candy that he developed a mouthful of cavities that made his father, a penny pincher, facing new dental bills, angry. No one realized that his mouthful of decay was a clue that something was wrong. It was the only clue, because he said nothing. I never told my mother and father, he said in an interview. I never got the words out of my mouth. Now here's something that I want to point out. A lot of times, people who have been abused and exploited as kids say to me, what if this happens to my child and I miss the sign? And I always say, your kid isn't you, your kid has you. And here's the thing. When your child is doing something that seems odd or wrong or inappropriate or bad, or, right, like, you know, bad, of course, I'm putting in air quotes, you're going to ask your child this one really simple question. You're going to say, why? As opposed to, stop eating all that candy. Don't you know that we're having dental bills? And don't you know how hard I work for my money? This is terrible. You need to stop eating candy. You know, it feels like I've talked to you a lot about eating candy, and you still feel the need to eat a lot of candy. Why? Where are you getting the money for all this candy? Your coach is giving you money? That's interesting. Why is your coach giving you money? Kind of unusual for a coach to give a kid this much money. Can you tell me more about that? And you might not get an answer in that moment, but if you keep asking, why, right? Why is this happening? And you keep asking your child, I don't want to go play at my friend's house. I just don't like that kid anymore. I don't want to play there. And as opposed to, let's encourage you to go play. You need to be more sociable. Yeah. Why not? Why don't you want to go? Why don't you want to go to Johnny's house? I just don't like it. Okay, then you don't have to go. What happens at Johnny's house? Like, I see you still like to go to Eric's house. What happens at Johnny's house? I don't know. I don't like his dad. Okay, yeah, sometimes we don't like everybody. Then a couple of days later, can you tell me more about Johnny's dad and what you don't like about him? And eventually, when you show that you're available to listen and that you're available to hear and that you're counter-shaming, even with something like, oh my gosh, kid, stop eating so much candy. You're getting cavities. Because you're not coming from that place. You're coming from that place of, why are you eating so much candy? What is it about the candy? Because you make the assumption that, you know, candy's yummy. Who wouldn't want to eat candy? But, like, you know, after, like, you had a dental visit and, like, you had a mouthful of cavities and the guy had to, like, I don't know, give you all those shots and drill and give you a root canal, that wasn't pleasant. And, you know, candy leads to cavities, but you're still eating candy. What's going on? Why? Well, it feels really good when I eat candy. I don't have to think. Okay, I hear. Yeah, when you eat candy, sometimes you kind of get hypnotized and you don't have to think. What's bad about thinking? And that might be like a casual question that you're slipping into conversation as you're driving somewhere. That might be a casual question that you're slipping into conversation as you and your child are doing a puzzle together. See my puzzle behind me, right? Maybe that's, you know, a casual conversation that you guys are doing as you're baking together or taking a walk. And when you show that you're available to listen and you're willing to listen and you're counter-shaming and you're not trying to, like, you know, discard what they're saying and just get them to do the behavior you want them to do, but you rather, I really want to get this, I really want to hear, I really want to understand, you're available to hear and be told and to understand. So your kid isn't you, your kid has you. You're not going to miss the signs of abuse, not because here are the 12 telltale signs of abuse to look for. That's not why, but because you are going to make yourself available as the person your kid comes to when they're confused about something, when they have a problem. Because every so often you're going to open the door to a conversation about sexual abuse because you're going to read books about sexual abuse. And I actually have a video on this YouTube channel explaining how to talk to kids about body safety and the picture books that I like to use when I'm having this kind of conversation with my own kids, with kids I'm working with in therapy, right? Like, we're going to have this conversation. And every so often, I'm going to remind you that if an adult is acting in a confusing way, I'm the person to talk to about that, and I won't overreact. I won't fly off the handle. I just want to hear, and then we'll figure out together what to do and what not to do and how to handle the situation. But I won't do anything behind your back. I'll discuss that with you, because if an adult is indeed behaving confusingly, might have to call another adult to handle that, but I won't do that behind your back. We'll figure it out together. You know, the guilt and the shame, and I hear this is like it's really interesting. For the rest of his life, he lived with guilt and shame over that silence. And so many post-traumatic parents have such unjustified guilt because of what they went through, and, you know, a sense of responsibility for something that they weren't responsible for because they were children. Children are not responsible for the actions of adults. He never got caught, he said of the coach. Because of me, how many other people did that guy nail? Because I didn't tell my mother, that's crushing to me. Entirely not his responsibility, right? Entirely not his fault. An adult made the choice to act inappropriately, not a child. Then there's something really, again, when I say interesting, I mean because I feel like a lot of post-traumatic parents need to hear this, because this might remind you of your own experience of trauma. And it's helpful to know, like, it's not only you, right? That's why the words "me too" are so powerful. Yeah, this is what it's like. This happens to everybody that went through what you went through. So we have a little bit more about his obsession, and then really important thing happens. He's in the courtroom, and his lawyer hires a psychologist to testify and explain about the impact of abuse on children. And he had a psychologist, and this is what it says about the psychologist. Mr. Davis took the witness stand, faced the jury to tell his story. He explained how the details of the abuse returned to him in his dreams, and said only by exhausting himself by running or bicycling eased his anxiety. As a daily runner, I can attest I was not abused, but I had other exploitative experiences in my childhood, and I will tell you that, yeah, sometimes running is the only thing that eases anxiety, or at least it's one of the major coping tools, right? Physical movement to discharge the adrenaline or cortisol can be super helpful. So he's kind of figured that out on his own. He said he is haunted by the fact that he didn't speak up. I could not get the words out, he testified. It's horrifying, the fact that I didn't tell my mother. It would have stopped him in his tracks. She knew the police, she knew everybody in town. This is what we call counterfactual thinking. Maybe you would have told your mother and she would have gotten it, and maybe not. We can't know, because if he's 79, there's a strong chance his mother's not around anymore, so we don't know. And 79, you know, so 69 years ago, we were pretty victim blaming and victim shaming. So maybe, but maybe not, right? But that sense of unjustified guilt that survivors have, so common. Now here's the part about the psychologist. A psychologist hired by Mr. Davis's lawyers testified about the effects of trauma on a person. The judge paused testimony when he noticed the jurors sleeping and called for a coffee break. But Mr. Davis, listening in court, was riveted. So perhaps that psychologist didn't have a great, bedside manner in terms of presenting these things. So what did the psychologist say? The psychologist was talking about polyvagal theory, and she was talking about we all know about fight, flight, right? That's, fight or flight, that, if something really scary happens, you either fight or you run away. And she brought up the third F, which is freeze, and the fourth F, which is fawn. I don't know if she brought up the fourth F, but there's freeze and fawn, which is polyvagal theory. The idea that there's two other options. Freeze is about going into this dorsal vagal shutdown where you're frozen and you can't actually act, but it's unconscious. It's something that happens to you. It's like telling somebody who's fainting not to faint. You don't have conscious control over that. Or somebody who's blushing to not blush. Stop sweating. Like, it's sweat. I can't stop my sweat. You know, there was a line in a kid's movie, you know, puke has a mind of its own, right? You can't tell your puke not to come because, right? It's a biological function. Dorsal vagal shutdown is a biological function like that. So when he heard about the freeze state, even though it says in the article that the psychologist's presentation was very dry, he was fascinated, and this is what it says. But something else happened during that trial, something that felt to him like a different kind of verdict. It was during the dry testimony of the psychologist, which had put a juror to sleep. She had been explaining that besides the familiar fight or flight response to trauma, there's another, the 3 Fs, she called them. The freeze response, she said, which basically is your nervous system tells you to stop whatever else you are doing, just endure, just survive, just make sure you get through this. So, freeze, Mr. Davis, listening silently, wept into his hand. That single word, freeze, was like a pardon. So the village of whichever village it was in Long Island hired an attorney to like defend them and say like, we're not culpable, right? Mr. Davis remained the face of the organization and even performed with a jazz combo at a fundraiser, singing oldies and American standards, I've Got You Under My Skin, Teenager in Love, My Way. During the trial, the village's attorney, Deanna Paniccio, I can't pronounce her name, probably butchered that, sought to undermine Mr. Davis's claims of pain and suffering by showing jurors videos of him singing in nightclubs in his tuxedo. Is this, she asked, what pain and suffering look like? Yes. That's what pain and suffering look like. Just because a child looks resilient and just because a child has it all together does not mean they don't also have PTSD. So let's like undo that narrative, like a child who's been abused looks like Oliver Twist begging for a crust of bread. A child who has been traumatized could be a straight A kid who's like the head, you know, I don't know, of the student body president and, you know, going straight to an Ivy League school and, you know, and everything's great except they have cavities a lot. That's what a child like, that's what a traumatized person looks like. When I was a kid with PTSD, full-blown clinical PTSD, I looked like a straight A student who had an active social life and active extracurricular involvement. And by all intents and purposes, I looked like I was thriving. I looked fine. So yeah, that's what pain and suffering looks like. The analogy I like to use is a duck. A duck looks so serene floating on the water, but under the water, the legs are paddling madly, just trying to stay afloat. So yeah, just to like unpack that and make that clear. Trauma does not always show up as, oh, this person just looks destitute and forlorn. That's not how trauma shows up. Just in case you didn't know that. As post-traumatic parents, you probably know, but people around you might gaslight you into doubting your experience of your own experience. You weren't that badly traumatized because you were a straight A student who was very traumatized, right? The two things are true. So I really enjoyed this article. I really think that Mr. Davis is an inspiration. I think it's incredible that he had the courage to, you know, so to speak, face his abuser in court, even if the person who abused him was dead by that point. But to get up and say, this happened to me, it wasn't okay, someone needs to answer for it. And even if, you know, the jury did not find the town culpable, you know what, though? They still had to come and defend themselves in court, and that's important. So I just want to make that, like, I just want to, you know, unpack the story because I think that this story really can teach us a lot about parenting and about post-traumatic parenting and about our trauma journey, like our own trauma journeys. So if you like this, if you have, you know, other thoughts, other comments, other personalities that you would like for me to, you know, talk about, to profile, to read about, maybe there's a documentary you saw, maybe there's a Reddit thread that you find interesting, please comment below and let me know. If this video was healing and supportive to you, send it to another post-traumatic parent because our post-traumatic parenting community grows one post-traumatic parent at a time. And by sending this to someone else, you are going to support them on their journey and you're going to allow our community to grow, which just benefits us all. If you want to hang out where the other post-traumatic parents hang out, check out @Dr. Kossel Psychology on Instagram. I do respond to my DMs. I do respond to comments. I do take suggestion topics for these videos, whether here on YouTube or on Instagram. If you want to read my writings about childhood trauma, parenting, and raising kids in a cycle-breaking way, check out the Targeted Parenting blog on Psychology Today. If you want to hear my in-depth interviews with experts and people who have something to say about trauma or parenting, check out the Post-Traumatic Parenting podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. If anybody knows Mr. Davis and knows how I could get a hold of him and get him on the podcast, I would love to interview him. So if anybody knows that, let me know. Email me, let me know. If you want to hear more about the book, which is coming out in 2025, check out drrobinkoslowitz.com, because all the pre-launch and launch and exciting events to launch the book are going to be happening. The book is coming out in 2025. I don't have an exact date yet, so stay tuned, because I will keep you posted about that, because I am so excited about this book coming out there into the world. It feels like another child that I've birthed, and people have asked me, how long did it take to write the book? And the answer is a year. And 46 years, like every single minute of my life led me up to writing this book. So now that we're at, the end of that journey and we're going to start showing the book to the world, I really want all of you to be a part of it. Until next time.